It's a rainy day in Georgia, and we're keeping dry under the front porch. Today I'm going to tell you how I decided I was going to be a railroader back in 1969. Hello my friends, today I'm going to continue my story on coming home. Chapter 3 will be about how I chose to work for the railroad. The next day I concluded it was time to go get a driver's license, and my mother went along with me. She had no intentions of getting a license for herself, however. I went into the troopers' barracks there in Blue Ridge and took the written test, having not even studied, and passed it by the skin of my teeth. I should have failed, but I'm a good guesser at multiple choice tests, and I got lucky on a few wild guesses. They said go outside and take your driving test when the trooper returns from whoever he's testing right now. Soon the trooper returned, telling the young lady, who was somewhat rattled, that she was welcome to come try the test again tomorrow if she wanted to. I concluded that she had failed the test and assumed it must be a humdinger of a driving test. When the officer turned and took the paperwork from my hand, he looked at me. You guessed it already. It was the same trooper who the day before had received my friendly waves. Let me see your learner's permit, he said. I don't have one, I replied. Maybe he declined to pursue the questions he had because of my quick rundown that I had just returned from the Navy and about how I had once possessed a Florida driver's license. But we walked to my car and he got in after Helen got out to wait for me. I thought, Lord, don't let him ask to see her driver's license. He spoke politely to her and off we went. The test was a real doozy too. I made 2 left turns, 1 right turn, stopped at 1 red light and a stop sign there in town. Went around the block and was back at the trooper station. Heck, I could have passed that test back when I was 12 and driving my brother David's car around in the backyard. I recall I did have a few problems in the backyard, however. I seem to remember running into a telephone pole. That wasn't too much trouble to get out of because I could just blame it on the rain and the wet grass. What was hard to explain, though, was all the donuts dug up in the backyard to my father the next day, and why the telephone pole now had a distinctive 30-degree tilt to it. That evening my father returned home. We were sitting and watching TV that evening and eating a big supper when my father asked me what I was going to do about getting a job. I told him it had been a long time since I had a vacation, that I planned to just visit with them a couple of weeks, then I would go get a job. I just need a little vacation from work for a while. Besides, I have a few bucks saved to tide me over for a while, I said, and I assumed he was cool with that idea, and it seemed like a reasonable thing to me. It was just good to be home for a change instead of gallivanting all over the world. If you've ever been without an immediate family for 4 years, you might understand the need to just be around family for a change. For the first time in weeks, I had made it through 2 whole days without being worried about my future for a change, but he had spoiled that for me. The next morning I woke up to the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. I hit the deck, got dressed, and after shaving and getting cleaned up, I walked into the kitchen. I said, it sure smells good in here. My father was sitting at the dining room table, had the newspaper open and was reading it. If I had looked a little closer, I would have noticed he was thumbing through the want ads. I sat down as the food was being placed on the table. We had a nice breakfast. It was nice to eat some eggs without occasionally biting down on some eggshells some ship's cook hadn't prepared properly, and drink some coffee that didn't taste like it was made with water dipped out of the ship's bilges. After we finished, I complimented my mother on making such a good breakfast. By the time I headed through to the living room, my father was already out there and was sitting in a rocking chair with the Atlanta Constitution newspaper flipped open to the want ads. This time I got the drift of what was on his mind. Whether it was the fact that he was truly concerned about my future or the fact he was afraid I was home to be a loafer for the rest of my life, I don't know. I was, however, feeling I had about worn out my welcome. As I was passing where he sat, he said, "When you gonna go get a job, son?" I kind of lost it briefly and said, this was sure a short vacation, but it fell on deaf ears. "Here's a job," he was saying, while looking at some menial job ad that I wouldn't have never even considered. Looking over his shoulder at the one ad, I saw one large ad that covered at least a third of the page. I wasn't even close enough to see what the words were, but I reached over his shoulder and pointed my finger at the big ad and said, "Hell, I'll go to work for those people right there." "What?" he asked as he took another look at the paper and at the ad he had overlooked all morning. He began to read aloud. It said something to the effect of, "Southern Railway now accepting applications for switchman, trainman, brakeman, rail car repairman. Footnote: Rail car repairman requires knowledge and experience of welding, blueprints, metal fabrication, and requires a high mechanical aptitude." "I will apply for the railway repairman's job," I interrupted. At that point in the ad he stopped and said, "You can't get a railroad job. It says welding and all those other requirements." I've already received a lot of information before I left the Navy about possibly working for a fire department because in the last 4 years I had specialized in firefighting and had taken every test in school the Navy had to offer on the subject, and in fact had excelled in it and achieved the rank of E5 studying it. Just wasn't sure firemen were paid enough. Now on a whim, I was actually ignoring all my training and going to actually consider applying for some job I never heard of before. I thought to myself, all that training, and in a fit of anger, I'm picking a job by wildly pointing my finger at the ad in the newspaper. The ad did, however, have its appeal to me. "Why can't I work with them?" I said. "What do you think I was learning when I took 3 years of machine shop in high school? If there was one thing Mr. Frank Lewis had taught me in those 3 years of teaching me, it was welding, blueprints, and metal fabrication. I don't know how to get to Atlanta from here, but if you will point me in the right direction, I will find it," I said. I thought to myself, he's still manipulating me, and I just fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. He just ended my vacation in 5 minutes, has me off looking for a job just like that. He said, "Point you in the right direction. Hell, I'll take you there." That concludes chapter 3. Thank you for listening. In the next part of my story, I'll tell you about the day I went to the railroad to apply for a job.